from Annunciation or Blessed Sacrament.
Time magazine essayist Lance Morrow also grew up Catholic in the 1950s in Washington and attended 2 years behind Buchanan, Washington's Gonzaga High School, a renowned Jesuit institution. Today, the school's playing fields bear the name Buchanan in honor of Pat's father and his 7 sons, all Gonzaga graduates.
We would all line up on Thursday afternoon and go to confession. When you went to confession, there were absolute rules about what you confessed, what was wrong, what was right. This universe, the stability of that universe accounts for a lot of Buchanan's worldview today. I think he feels that universe was betrayed, and there's a sense of something gone very much awry, and that it has to be set right by returning somehow to the universe of those certitudes.
Buchanan's sense of certitude also derived from the other imposing force in his life, his father, Bill "Pop" Buchanan, an arch-conservative, a supporter of Senator Joe McCarthy. Buchanan Sr. also listened to the bigoted and isolationist radio orator Father Coughlin, who stirred populist passions and controversy on the eve of World War II.
Shall we risk our Americanism and our Christianity, therefore, for the blood profits to be gained by the internationalists?
Internationalists would have been widely understood in those days as a thinly veiled reference to Jews. By the 1950s, though, to the degree that it existed at all among the student body at Gonzaga, anti-Semitism had reverted, says Lance Morrow, to an almost reflexive variety.
There was anti-Semitism to some extent among the students, and I think that it was something of the traditional Catholic, well, the very bad tradition of the Church, of the almost of the they killed Christ variety, the 2,000-year-old blood libel.
The Buchanans lived next door to a Jewish family, the Bernsteins. One of the kids, Bob Bernstein, now a doctor in Pittsburgh, remembers being called a Christ killer and being beaten up by some of the younger Buchanan brothers. Not Pat, he says. He would have been about 10 years older than Bernstein. Bernstein did not want to appear on camera. At least one other Jewish neighbor, though, agreed to talk and has no such recollections.
It's very troubling, I mean, to read about such accounts or hear such accounts stated by you when that was never my experience.
It's not that Pat Buchanan today is associated with overtly anti-Semitic or racist acts or statements, but rather that he has created an image of someone who might be sympathetic to such acts or statements by others.
I think that's his worst side. He is a very charming, funny, interesting, intelligent man in many ways. I think that he's lighting matches and tossing them into piles of dry leaves at the moment, and I think this is very dangerous.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by MCI.
Mr. Pat Buchanan is 30 years old. He just turned 30. He is a former St. Louis Globe Democrat editorial writer. He is an honor graduate from Georgetown University.
The year was 1968, and Pat Buchanan had entered the big time as a special assistant and speechwriter to the newly elected president, Richard Nixon. Mr. Nixon had a special use for Buchanan's pugnacious style and fiercely held beliefs.
When Nixon wanted compassion, he turned to Ray Price. When he wanted humor, he turned to Bill Safire. When he wanted sock it to him, when he wanted raw red meat, when he wanted the dark side of Richard Nixon, he turned to Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan was Richard Nixon's dark side, formally.
Perhaps it is time that the networks were made more responsive to the views of the nation and more responsible to the people they serve.
Vice President Agnew also made use of Buchanan's tough style. On a famous campaign swing in the fall of 1970, Agnew made it his mission to bash the Eastern media establishment. He took along Buchanan and Bill Safire. Safire contributed the phrase, nattering nabobs of negativism. Buchanan, the phrase,
Pusillanimous pussyfooting on the critical issue of law and order.
both were repeated by Agnew in a series of speeches.
One of them damned the networks. I think that was Des Moines. And the second one damned the New York Times and Washington Post, Don Montgomery. Pat wrote both of those.
Buchanan became, in many instances, the attack dog of the Nixon administration. He is variously credited or blamed with drawing up the infamous enemies list of reporters. He also lashed out at congressional leaks during the Watergate investigation.
I think given the character of the leaks themselves, each of them has been daily damaging to the President, the Secretary of State, or some individual under indictment. I think the purpose of these is to tear down the President of the United States, quite frankly.
Pat is living a speechwriter's Walter Mitty dream. He's up there, and he's working the crowd. And it's quite exhilarating when you work a crowd. You're doing the speeches that you had written for other people and that they didn't deliver.
Welcome to Capitol Gang. I'm Pat Buchanan with...
It was not Pat Buchanan's speechwriting, though, that made him famous. It was his role as a political commentator on Washington talk shows. During the past 10 years, it has sometimes seemed as though he has been on them all.
We had to take 1 million immigrants in, say, Zulus next year or Englishmen, and what's going on out there in the country is a middle-class revolt, is these damnable insider deals betraying the people on quotas, on taxes.
Buchanan was a member of the original McLaughlin Group, hosted by his old friend and fellow Nixon speechwriter, John McLaughlin. This weekend, Buchanan the politician is the subject for his former colleagues.
Issue 1.
Yes, sir.
The Buchanan Revolt or Buchanalia.
I sat down with the McLaughlin Group members today to talk about how the tables have turned.
I don't recall a journalist running for president before.
No. He's really been more of a political activist than journalist his whole life. And even when he was doing journalistic things like television shows, he was doing them from the standpoint, he viewed himself as a Republican.
What Pat says as a journalist and what he says as a politician appear to be totally identical.
Buchanan may be best known for his work on CNN's Crossfire program, where he and Michael Kinsley battled out partisan issues nightly.
We were friendly. We were never friends. We never went out drinking after the show or anything like that. And I think that's true of Pat and most of his his journalistic colleagues.
Let me ask you, Eleanor, a question which I guess will elicit a chuckle from each of you, and that is the notion of Pat Buchanan as an outsider from Washington, that is.
Oh, he has lived inside the Beltway, as he points out, before there was even a Beltway. He very rarely has a meal in his home. He and Shelley have a table at the Jockey Club where his favorite dish is Grand Marnier souffle.
It's not so much that he's a Chardonnay sipper, although he does prefer Chardonnay to beer. I do happen to know that. It's that he's more like he's a Washington elitist in another sense. He's an inside the Beltway policy wonk. He has no interest in going out bowling with the guys. His idea of a good time is reading some obscure book of 19th century economics.
Pat is a delight to be with. He's filled with ideas. He's basically a scholar. He reads voraciously. He's an historian. He's uniformly civil and polite.
I've known Pat for 30 years, and I think he's a certifiable nut, and I can say that because I said it to his face. But I still sort of like him. But we're not friends, social friends, that kind of thing.
Jack, I've got to pick you up on that. You don't call someone a certifiable nut without giving at least a little bit of explanation. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, I just think I think Pat's views I think they are extreme. He was a guy. In those days, he would have bombed Nicaragua. I think. I think I think he has a lot of dangerous views that are mistaken.
Question, can Buchanan repeat New Hampshire?
The issue of Pat Buchanan's candidacy, though, brought a rare moment of near unanimity within the McLaughlin group this week.
What's the probability that Pat Buchanan will be the nominee of the Republican Party? Freddie?
Well, before New Hampshire, I would have said 0. Now I'd say between 1 and 2.
0.25%.
Yeah, something under 1.
Something under 1. Mort?
2.5.
2.5 is all right, Mort. Predictions, Beetle.
During our conversation after the taping of the show, Morton Kondracki had one more prediction.
If he gets beat this year, he will be back 4 years from now, because he thinks this is a rolling thing, and eventually he's going to convince the country's going to come behind him, that his ideas are right, that protectionism is the right way to go, that isolationism is what America wants, and that he'll be president.
Forces of the old order are going to rally against us. The establishment is coming together. You can hear them right now. The fax machines and the phones are buzzing in Washington, D.C. Well, you got to get together. Somebody's got to get out and take on this guy. We got to have one guy take him on.
This is, after all, Buchanan's hometown, but fair's fair. He was right on the money.
This is not the time for intolerance. This is the time for tolerance. This is the time for inclusion. This is the time for recognizing that we are all in this together as a family.
I think when the nominating process is over, we'll nominate somebody who is broadly acceptable to the entire party and somebody who I think will, in fact, win the presidency this fall.
And I'll tell you, with the Buchanan candidacy, we'd be lucky to hold on, to keep a majority in the House or the Senate or state legislatures or courthouses or anywhere else.
I am delighted to have the arrogant, stupid, selfish Republican establishment scared to death.
They are, aren't they?
They're panicky. They're terrified.
Why are you being so nasty about the Republican establishment?
Because I thought this was the establishment at their worst, Ted. They take a man, 72-year-old person who was best days as a campaigner are behind him, Senator Dole. They never were very good.
Well, there are lots of people who would like to stop Buchanan, and they're having lunch with each other at the Palm, saying, we're going to stop Buchanan. But they have no troops at all.
Before I got here, what was the most interesting comment that anyone had made about Buchanan?
I think there was a consensus that the Republicans are going to have to rally to defeat Buchanan if he wins in some place like South Carolina.
I don't think the American people want to go backwards in terms of the race question. I don't think they want to go backwards on the Jewish or the Nazi question. And so I just, while I think he's got some interesting points, I think he's just appealing to the worst instincts in people, and I don't think that succeeds in this country.
Frank Fahrenkopf, the former chairman of the Republican National Committee, agrees, but warns that Buchanan will not go away.
He'll be there, I think, to the end, very much like Jesse Jackson. He knows that he'll get 25% of the vote almost anywhere he goes.
He also knows how to get this stuff for free.
And he does. Well, he works it well. He knows how to get on the telephone and do talk radio, which is, he doesn't have to pay for it.
Establishments never know that their time is past until it's past. And in early 1789, French nobles were sitting around saying, well, yeah, it looks a little rough out there in the countryside, but don't worry, at the end of the day, things will revert to normal. And in the Washington establishment, the Washington Republican establishment, is basically sitting around at their lunches at the Palm, reassuring each other that at the end of the day, things will revert to normal.
One very simple question. What should the Republicans do about Pat Buchanan?
Find a viable candidate to replace him.
Why?
In my opinion. I just think from the Republican standpoint, that his views are too extreme to enable him to be a viable candidate in the election in November.
They have to just keep painting him as the fanatic that the man is. And Bob Dole has to continually say that he does not represent the majority of Republican voters in this country and leave him, push him away.
if you were advising both the Dole and the Alexander campaigns at this point, would you say come out with that kind of a statement?
Yeah, I would lower the rhetoric. I'd lower it tremendously. It is important. The one thing that Bob Dole or Lamar Alexander, if either one of them is the eventual nominee, they don't want Pat marching off into the hinterlands with the people that he's bringing into this party and who are supporting him.
I would not use the word extremist when talking about him, nor racist, nor anything else. But what I would attack is his policies and try to inform Republican voters that we are a party of hope and opportunity, not one of fear and cowardice.
Buchanan has to be stopped by Dole or Alexander. That, I think, is the great mistake of all the Washington insiders. They think that Colin Powell or people having lunch at the Palm can stop Pat Buchanan.
Sometimes it's both. This man was waiting to lunch at the Palm.
What they should do is probably draft Colin Powell. That would be their best bet.
I think Dole will have to strengthen his situation. Maybe he gets Colin Powell as a running mate.
I'm not sure that there's anything at this point they can do to save it. If Powell's not interested in getting back in, who's going to be back in? I don't know.
You seem to be saying this could sink Republican chances for the White House.
I believe it will. Unfortunately.
By all accounts, Pat Buchanan is having a whale of a good time, and his sense of enjoyment is infectious. There is, however, someone here in Washington who is reportedly enjoying Buchanan's success every bit as much as he is. That person already lives here and is hoping to renew the lease for another 4 years. I'll be back with a closing note in a moment. Vladimir Zhirinovsky, the Russian ultra-nationalist, embarrassed Pat Buchanan today by embracing him as an ideological soulmate. Today, said Zhirinovsky, there is a presidential candidate in America who is not afraid to speak the truth, that truly the Congress of the United States is an occupied territory of Israel. Your press, Zhirinovsky went on, is occupied, and all of your finances. Americans don't manage those, Israel does, through American Jews or Negroes. The Buchanan campaign immediately issued a message of rejection to Zhirinovsky. It's not that Buchanan hasn't expressed some of the views that Zhirinovsky echoed, but perhaps he'd never realized how ugly they sounded until he heard them in the mouth of a genuine bigot. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
Nightline is a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.